The grand hall fell into a silence so sharp it felt like the air itself had stopped breathing. Every head turned toward the entrance. The doors had just opened, and standing there, calm, radiant, unmoving, was the one woman no one expected to see, Lady Seraphina Rowan. Not broken, not ashamed, not alone. 3 young boys stood beside her, each holding her hand. A whisper tore through the crowd like wildfire. "Those are her children." At the altar, Lord Alastair Pembroke staggered back as if the ground had shifted beneath him. His bride's smile faded. The orchestra faltered. Even the chandeliers above seemed to dim under the weight of the moment. Because the woman he had once cast out as barren had returned with undeniable truth. And in that instant, everything he built on pride began to collapse. If you think you already know how this story ends, you don't. Because what led to this moment is far more painful, and what comes after it is even more powerful. Before we go further, tell me, where are you watching from? And if you love powerful stories like this, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what comes next. Stay with me. The Pembroke estate stood like a quiet declaration of power against the gray English sky, its tall windows reflecting a world built on wealth, order, and expectation. Inside, polished floors carried the soft footsteps of servants, and every room held the careful perfection of a house that answered to reputation before comfort. Lord Alastair Pembroke moved through it like a man who owned not only the walls, but the air within them. His tailored coat fit him with exact precision, his posture upright, his expression controlled. In every gathering, he was admired. In every conversation, he was respected. Yet beneath the admiration lay something less spoken, curiosity, then doubt. At a recent dinner hosted by the Ashbournes, laughter had flowed easily, wine poured without restraint, and conversations drifted between estates, investments, and lineage. It was there, between a polite smile and a measured sip of claret, that the subject had surfaced once more. "No heir yet, Pembroke?" one gentleman had asked lightly, though his eyes lingered too long. Another voice followed with a softer tone. 7 years is quite a stretch. The table did not fall silent, but something shifted. It always did. Alastair smiled, a thin, practiced curve of the lips. These things take time. But the remark followed him home like a shadow. Lady Seraphina Pembroke, by contrast, moved through the estate without noise or demand. Her presence was felt in the details, the fresh flowers arranged in the drawing room, the steady running of the household, the quiet attention to every need before it was spoken. She had been there before the polished floors, before the grandeur, when Alastair's ambitions had been little more than determined words. She never reminded him of that. Instead, she continued to believe in the man she had married. That evening, she supervised the placement of supper in the dining room, roasted pheasant, buttered carrots, and warm bread set neatly beside a modest glass of wine. When Alastair entered, she greeted him with a soft expression, one that carried both affection and concern. "You returned later than expected," she said gently. "Business," he replied, removing his gloves without looking at her. She did not press further. She never did. But the distance between them had begun to grow, subtle at first, now impossible to ignore. In the days that followed, it deepened. Letters from her mother arrived more frequently, each one filled with careful words that carried unmistakable pressure. A family name, she wrote, must not fade. A house like theirs must not fall silent. Alastair read every word, and believed every one. By the time the tension reached its breaking point, it had already rooted itself in him. It showed in the way he lingered less at the dinner table, in the sharpness of his silence, in the way his gaze no longer softened when it met Seraphina's. The storm came quietly. It was late evening. The bedchamber was lit only by candlelight, shadows shifting along the walls. Seraphina sat at the edge of the bed, her hands folded carefully in her lap, as though holding herself together. Alastair entered without greeting. 7 years, he said, his voice steady but edged with something colder than anger. She looked up at him. Yes. 7 years and still nothing. The words did not rise, but they cut. Serafina held his gaze. We have tried. Perhaps we should consult another physician, together. There is no need, he interrupted, his tone sharpening. I know where the problem lies. A brief silence followed. Alistair, she said quietly, we cannot know that without certainty. I have no intention of subjecting myself to pointless examinations. I am not the one who has failed. The room seemed smaller then. I have not failed you, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. I have stood beside you in everything. I have prayed. I have hoped. And yet, he said, turning slightly away, this house remains without an heir. There was no shouting, no raised hand, no dramatic gesture. Only certainty, only dismissal. Serafina rose slowly. Do not speak of me as though I am nothing more than this. He faced her then, his expression composed, distant. What else remains? The question did not seek an answer. It ended something. He crossed the room and reached for the bell pull, then stopped, as if reconsidering. Instead, he moved to the desk, picked up a letter, and began writing with calm precision. You are writing now? She asked, barely above a whisper. To my solicitor. There is no reason to delay what is already clear. Her breath caught. Alistair, this marriage is finished. The words settled into the room like finality itself. She stood still as he sealed the letter. There will be arrangements made, he continued. You will leave in the morning. The man she had loved did not waver. Not once. Hours later, the house had fallen into silence. Servants had withdrawn, doors closed, candles dimmed. In the quiet of the chamber, Serafina opened her wardrobe and began to pack. Each dress she folded carried a memory, dinners shared, mornings filled with quiet conversation, moments that now felt distant, as though they had belonged to another life. Her hands trembled only once. Then they steadied. She did not rush. She did not collapse. She moved with a quiet dignity, placing each item into her trunk as though preserving something that could not be taken from her. When she finished, she paused. The room around her no longer felt like home. With measured steps, she closed the trunk, lifted what she could carry, and walked toward the door. No one stopped her. The corridor stretched long and silent as she passed through it, the walls lined with portraits that once watched her as mistress of the house. Now they observed her departure without acknowledgement. At the entrance, the night air met her with a chill that cut through fabric and bone alike. She stepped forward, not knowing where the road would lead, only knowing she would not remain where she was no longer wanted. And without looking back, Lady Serafina Pembroke walked into the darkness, carrying nothing but what she could hold, and something far stronger than what she had lost. The carriage that brought Serafina into London did not announce her arrival with grandeur. It stopped quietly along a narrow street where the houses stood close together, their brick faces softened by ivy and time. There were no gates, no long driveways, no servants waiting in formation. Instead, there was the faint scent of baked bread drifting through the air and the distant sound of everyday life, footsteps, laughter, doors opening and closing without ceremony. Miss Elowyn Hartwell opened her door before Serafina could knock a second time. Surprise crossed her face first, then concern, and finally something steadier, recognition. Serafina, she said softly. That was all it took. The strength Serafina had carried through the long journey slipped, not into collapse, but into quiet surrender. She stepped inside without explanation, her hands still wrapped around the small case she carried, as though letting go of it would mean admitting how little remained. Elowyn's home was modest, but it held warmth in ways Pembroke Hall never had. A fire burned steadily in the hearth. A small table near the window was set with simple dishes, fresh bread, a pot of tea, and a jar of preserves. The curtains were drawn not for display, but for comfort. No one watched, no one judged. For the first time in years, Serafina sat without needing to perform composure. Yet the silence within her was heavier than any room she had left behind. The days that followed moved slowly. She spoke little, ate only when pressed, and avoided the window whenever voices passed in the street below. London, though vast, felt close enough for whispers to find her. She imagined familiar names spoken behind gloved hands, imagined her story reduced to a single word: barren. It settled into her thoughts like truth she had never proven. Elowyn did not allow that silence to remain unchallenged. One afternoon, as Seraphina sat near the hearth, her hands resting idle in her lap, Elowyn placed a folded cloth aside and faced her fully. "You have accepted something no one confirmed," she said. Seraphina did not look up. "There is nothing to confirm." "There is everything to confirm," Elowyn replied, her tone calm but firm. "You lived under a conclusion handed to you, not one discovered." Her fingers tightened slightly. It was clear enough. "To him," Elowyn said, "not to a physician, not to truth." The words lingered. It was not comfort Elowyn offered, it was insistence. The following morning, Seraphina found herself seated in a physician's consulting room, her hands folded once more, though this time they trembled with something sharper than grief: uncertainty. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and paper. Shelves lined with medical texts stood behind a polished desk, and the quiet order of the place carried a weight of authority she could not ignore. As the examinations began, a single thought repeated itself with quiet persistence: what if he was right? It followed her through every moment: the questions, the procedures, the waiting. It settled in her chest, not loudly, but with enough force to make each breath feel measured. When the physician finally returned with the results, he spoke without hesitation. "You are in good health," he said. "Your body shows no deficiency. If there has been difficulty, it would be wise to examine the other party involved." The room remained still. Something within her broke, not into pieces, but open. Years of quiet blame, of whispered judgment, of nights spent questioning her own worth, all shifted at once. The weight she had carried so carefully no longer had a place to rest. Her hand rose to her mouth as tears filled her eyes, not restrained, not hidden. They came freely, carrying grief for what had been endured and release for what had been proven false. She had not failed. She had been made to believe she had. Elowyn, seated beside her, reached for her hand not to steady her, but to acknowledge what had just been returned to her: the truth. The days after were different. Not immediately brighter, not suddenly easy, but altered. The silence within her began to shape. It no longer carried shame. It carried space. Elowyn, ever practical, encouraged her to remain engaged. Together, they began preparing small batches of baked goods, loaves of bread, delicate pastries, and simple cakes that could be sold to nearby households. The work was modest, but it required attention, care, and presence. At first, Seraphina moved through it cautiously, as though unsure she belonged in such ordinary rhythm. But there was something grounding in the process: the feel of flour between her fingers, the warmth of the oven, the quiet satisfaction of creating something that did not demand perfection, only effort. Customers returned. Then more followed. They spoke not of her past, but of the quality of what she offered. And slowly she began to stand without the weight she once carried. It was on a quiet afternoon, as she arranged fresh loaves on the small display near the door, that she noticed him. Mr. Thaddeus Rowan stood just beyond the threshold, observing without intrusion. His presence was composed, his manner reserved, yet attentive. When he stepped inside, he did so without assumption, his voice measured, his gaze respectful. "You have built something of care here," he said simply. Seraphina inclined her head slightly. "It is a beginning, a meaningful one," he replied. He did not ask questions that reached into her past. He did not offer sympathy she had not requested. Instead, he returned the following day, and the day after that, each time with the same quiet courtesy. There was no urgency in him, No expectation, only presence. And for the first time since leaving Pembroke Hall, Seraphina found herself responding not out of duty, but out of ease. One evening, as the last light of day settled softly against the windows, she paused while arranging a tray, her hands still for a moment longer than necessary. Then, without effort, without thought, she smiled. Not the practiced expression she had worn in drawing rooms, not the polite curve required for society, but something unguarded, something real. It came quietly, and it stayed. The past had not disappeared, but it no longer defined her. And in that small, unspoken moment, something within her began to live again. They moved with quiet purpose, shaped by small routines that slowly restored what had once been taken from her. The bakery had grown beyond a simple table by the window. Shelves now held neatly arranged loaves, sugared buns, and delicate pastries that carried the scent of butter and spice into the street. Customers came not out of curiosity, but out of habit. Her name was spoken with respect again, not as a subject of quiet pity, but as a woman who had built something of her own. Thaddeus Rowan remained a constant presence within that new rhythm. He never arrived with urgency. He stepped in as though the space already belonged to peace, greeting her with a calm that asked for nothing and offered everything. Their conversations unfolded gently, never forced, never rushed. He spoke of simple things, trade, weather, books he had read, and listened when she chose to speak, never pressing beyond what she willingly gave. Trust did not return to her all at once. It came in moments. In the way he waited when she paused. In the way he never corrected her silence. In the way his presence did not demand explanation. There were evenings when they walked along the quieter streets of London, the sound of carriage wheels distant, the air cool against their skin. He would match his pace to hers without comment, his hands resting behind his back, as though allowing space itself to speak between them. "You do not have to carry everything alone," he said once, his voice low, steady. She did not answer immediately. "I am learning that," she replied at last. He nodded, not as agreement, but as understanding. Their bond deepened without declaration. It did not need grand gestures to define it. It lived in consistency, in patience, in the quiet assurance that neither would wound the other. When he asked for her hand, it was done without spectacle. There was no audience, no elaborate arrangement, only a simple moment, shared in the soft light of her modest home, where he stood before her with calm certainty. "I would like to build a life with you," he said. She studied him, not with doubt, but with care. "And you understand what I have been through?" she asked. "I do, and I do not measure you by it." That was enough. Their wedding followed the same spirit. It was small, attended only by those who mattered, held in a quiet chapel where the vows felt personal rather than performed. There were no grand carriages, no long guest lists, no display meant to impress society. Only truth, only intention. And when he placed the ring upon her finger, Seraphina felt no fear, only steadiness. Life after marriage did not change her work, it strengthened it. Thaddeus supported her quietly, offering practical help when needed, never overshadowing what she had built. The bakery expanded into a proper shop, its windows filled with carefully arranged goods, its reputation growing steadily among households that valued quality over spectacle. There was dignity in the life she had created, and peace. It was in the midst of that peace that something unexpected began. At first, it was a subtle change, a tiredness that lingered longer than usual, a sensitivity to scents that once brought comfort. The smell of fresh pastries, once familiar, became difficult to bear. She dismissed it at first, attributing it to fatigue. But when the days passed and the feeling remained, Thaddeus grew attentive. "You should see a physician," he said gently. She hesitated, not from fear of illness, but from something deeper, an echo of the past she had not fully silenced. Still, she agreed. The examination was careful, thorough, and quiet. She sat once again in a familiar setting, her hands folded, her thoughts steady yet watchful. This time, however, the fear that had once consumed her did not take hold in the same way. When the physician returned, there was a softness in his expression. "Mrs. Rowan, you are with child." The words settled into the room like light breaking through cloud. Seraphina did not speak first. Then her breath caught. Her hand rose to her chest as tears filled her eyes, not restrained, not held back. They came with a force that carried years within them, years of doubt, of blame, of quiet suffering that never belonged to her. Thaddeus stepped closer, his hand finding hers. "You are not alone in this," he said softly. She turned to him, her voice breaking as she spoke. "I was never what they said I was." "No," he replied, his gaze unwavering. The moment did not end there. Further examination revealed something even more astonishing. "There is more than one," the physician added carefully. "You are expecting 3 children." The room seemed to shift again, but this time with wonder. 3. The weight of that truth carried meaning beyond its number. It wasn't simply a blessing, it was a quiet, undeniable answer to everything that had once been spoken against her. When the time came, the birth was met both with strain and triumph. The house filled with movement, with careful attention, with the presence of those who understood the importance of the moment. Hours passed, measured not by clocks, but by effort and endurance. Then came the sound that changed everything. A cry, then another, and another. 3 small lives brought into the world together. Tears flowed freely, not only from Seraphina, but from those who witnessed it. Thaddeus stood beside her, his composure broken only by the quiet emotion in his eyes as he looked upon his sons. "They are here," he said, as though the words themselves carried disbelief. Seraphina held them close, her hands steady, despite everything she had endured to reach that moment. She did not need to say anything. The truth had already spoken. Words spread quietly at first, then more widely. Those who once whispered now spoke with a different tone, not admiration alone, but recognition. The story that had once reduced her to a single judgment had been undone by reality itself. Meanwhile, in the distance, Alastair Pembroke's life moved along a different path. His house remained grand, his name still known, but something essential was missing. Relationships formed and dissolved without lasting impact. Each attempt to secure an heir ended in disappointment. Frustration grew, though he did not allow it to show openly. Instead, he carried it beneath the same composed exterior he had always maintained. Eventually, he announced his engagement to Lady Verity Ashbourne. The plans that followed were nothing short of extravagant. Invitations were sent across counties, arrangements made to ensure the event would be spoken of for years. It was not merely a wedding, it was a statement. Proof that he had moved forward, proof that he had not lost. And among the names written upon the guest list, one stood out: Lady Seraphina Rowan. The invitation was deliberate, carefully sent, intended to be seen, as though pride itself required a witness. The stage had been set, and this time it would not be silence that answered. The hall chosen for the wedding of Lord Alastair Pembroke and Lady Verity Ashbourne glittered beneath layers of carefully arranged grandeur. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over polished floors, long tables displayed silver platters of roasted meats, sugared fruits, and delicate pastries, and rows of gilt chairs held members of society who had gathered not merely to witness a union, but to measure it. Every detail spoke of intention, every arrangement carried the weight of reputation. Conversations moved in controlled tones, fans lifted and lowered with practiced elegance, and gloved hands rested upon silk and velvet. It was not simply a celebration, it was a display. At the front of the hall, Alastair stood in formal attire, his posture composed, his expression fixed. To any observer, he appeared the same man he had always been, assured, untouchable. Yet beneath that surface, something unsettled moved. His gaze drifted more often than necessary toward the entrance. He checked the doors between formal greetings, his attention divided, his patience strained by something he did not name aloud. He was waiting, not for his bride, for Seraphina. The invitation he had sent had not been careless, it had been deliberate, shaped by a quiet desire to confirm what he had long convinced himself of, that she would arrive diminished, that time had reduced her, that the life he had cast aside had not survived without him. He wanted to see it, to prove himself right. The music softened as the ceremony approached its beginning. The murmurs settled, the moment gathered itself. Then the doors opened. The sound was not loud, but it carried. Every head turned. At the threshold stood Lady Seraphina Rowan. She did not hesitate, she did not look uncertain. Her posture was steady, her expression calm, her presence undeniable. At her side stood 3 young boys. Each held her hand. For a moment the room did not react. Then the shift began. Whispers moved from one guest to another, quiet at first, then impossible to contain. Eyes widened, fans stilled, conversations broke apart mid-sentence. Recognition spread. Alistair felt it before he fully understood it. His breath faltered, his composure fractured in a way no one had seen before. His hand moved slightly, as though reaching for balance that was no longer there. The image before him did not align with the certainty he had carried for years. Seraphina did not lower her gaze. She walked forward with measured steps, her sons beside her, their small movements steady and unafraid. The sound of her footsteps against the polished floor seemed louder than the music that had just ceased. The space parted for her without instruction. At the altar, Lady Verity turned, her attention drawn not by curiosity, but by the change in the room itself. Her eyes moved from the guests to Alistair, then followed the direction of every gaze. She saw Seraphina, then she saw the children. Her expression shifted, not into confusion, but into understanding that formed quickly, decisively. She stepped closer to Alistair, her voice low, controlled. "Who is she?" He did not answer immediately. "Your former wife," she corrected herself, as realization settled. "And those children?" He swallowed, but no words came. The silence answered for him. Verity's gaze sharpened, not with emotion, but with clarity. "You told me she was incapable of bearing children." The distance between what had been said and what stood before them could not be bridged. Alistair's composure faltered completely. "I believed," he began, but the sentence did not hold. "You believed what suited you," Verity replied. The room listened without appearing to do so. Seraphina had reached her place among the guests. She did not sit immediately. Her presence alone had already altered the balance of the room. Verity turned toward her. "Madam," she said, her tone formal but direct, "is it true these are your children?" Seraphina met her gaze. Yes. There was no hesitation, no embellishment, only truth. Verity held that answer for a moment, then turned back to Alistair. "You built this union on something unproven," she said quietly, "and expected me to stand upon it." He stepped toward her. "This is not the time." "There is no better time," she replied. Her decision did not arrive with drama. It settled with certainty. "I will not proceed." The words carried further than any raised voice. A movement passed through the room. Guests exchanged glances, their composure intact, but their attention sharpened. The atmosphere shifted from admiration to observation, from celebration to judgment. The ceremony dissolved without formal declaration. What had been prepared for display became something else entirely. Alistair stood where he had been placed, but nothing around him remained as it had been. The carefully arranged order no longer held. The meaning of the moment had changed. Serafina did not remain to witness its full collapse. She took her seat briefly, then rose with quiet purpose. Her sons followed without question. She did not look toward the altar again. She did not seek acknowledgement from those who watched her. She had not come for them. She walked toward the exit with the same calm she had carried upon entering. No words of triumph left her. No expression of victory crossed her face. She left with dignity intact. In the days that followed, the consequences unfolded without spectacle. Conversations moved through drawing rooms, not loudly but persistently. What had occurred could not be undone, nor easily reinterpreted. Alistair sought answers he had long avoided. The consultation he finally attended was quiet, clinical, and without judgment. The conclusion offered no comfort. The fault had never been hers. He carried that knowledge with him when he came to Serafina. Her home was smaller than the estate he had once ruled, but it held something he immediately recognized: peace. The sound of children's voices, the scent of food prepared without ceremony, the presence of a life built without pretense. She received him without hostility. He spoke without defense. "I was wrong," he said, the words stripped of the authority they once held. She listened. "I believed what I chose to believe, and I let it destroy what I should have protected." There was nothing to argue, nothing to correct. When he finished, silence remained between them, but it was not the same silence they had once shared. "I do not ask you to return," he said. "You cannot," she replied gently. He lowered his gaze. "I know." The weight of what had passed did not require repetition. "I forgive you," she said. The words did not restore what had been lost. They released it. He nodded, not in relief, but in acceptance. When he left, he carried nothing with him but the truth he had once refused. And for the first time, it was enough. Serafina returned to her life without looking back. Her home remained filled with quiet joy, her days shaped by purpose, her children growing beneath her care, her husband beside her without condition. Elsewhere, Alistair stood alone within rooms that still reflected wealth, but no longer held meaning. The silence there had changed. It no longer carried authority, only reflection. And in the distance between those two lives, one truth remained clear. It did not need to be spoken loudly to be understood. It had already revealed itself.